I'm going on to another question. This is from John Stewart, please.
Would Scotland be financially better off as an independent nation?
Would Scotland be financially better off as an independent nation? This isn't a question about the Scottish economy particularly, but it's a reference to what seems to be a key issue, judging by the polls, which is that if you tell people in Scotland that they'll be £500 better off, 65% of them will say they'll vote for independence. If you say they'll be £500 worse off, 65% of them vote against. So it just seems to be a matter of whether independence makes you richer or poorer, and nothing else. Hamza, do you agree with that?
No, actually, independence is a lot more about the economy, of course. In the recession that we're in, the economic levers are incredibly important, and the question from John was about whether or not Scotland would be better off as an independent country. I firmly believe it absolutely would be. The government's own expenditure and revenue statistics that came out showed that we give the UK taxpayer, the Treasury, 9.6%, while we are only 8.4% of the population.
But do you agree that it's the
9.3%?
Do you agree it's the crunch point of the argument for independence, whether that when it comes to this, whenever we get it, the referendum on Scottish independence, in the fact what they'll be arguing about is how much more is going to be in my pocket as a result?
It's undoubtedly an important part of why I believe in independence. I don't believe in independence because it's to do with flag-waving, kilt-wearing, haggis-eating, romanticised nationalist, braveheart nationalism. Okay, these are all things I quite like doing, incidentally, sometimes at the same time. But that's not what independence... The independence we crave is to have those economic powers. The independence we crave is to create jobs, to create wealth. And at its most simple and at its most basic, the reason why I believe in independence is because all the decisions made about Scotland and in Scotland should be made by those that care most about the interests of Scotland, and that is the people of Scotland. So economics is important, but it's about so much more than that.
Janet's reporter.
I think if independence is just based on some kind of bank balance, that's completely the wrong reason for independence. I thought you wanted independence because your life would come to a natural end unless you had it. I thought it was
everybody's life comes to a natural end.
No, what I mean is I thought it was like your lifeblood. You were culturally so strong, so proud that it was like, you know, you have to be independent, otherwise life's not worth living. You know what I think? You know, have independence, but it's going to cost a lot of money. It's going to cost a fortune. Are you going to have a border? Are you going to have your own money? Are you going to have your own stamps? How are we going to split up the defence budget? I was reading Stephanie Flanders' blog on the BBC. You could say she was biased, but I didn't think that actually you did. The way that I read it was that Scotland actually costs England money, and that you've quoted your own figures.
Well, the government's figures actually, and the UK government's figures.
Yeah, well, I've just read Stephanie Flanders' blog, which begs to differ. But I think, should government be based on money? If you are independent, isn't it got to cost a fortune?
Okay. You can't answer that. This is
why not?
Because it's a rhetorical question, I think, that she's
sure
put.
It was. Oh, okay.
No, it was rhetorical. Willie Rennie.
The problem for Hamza is that he doesn't really know. He doesn't really know whether we're going to be better off. It's an assertion that Scotland would be better off, but we don't have the evidence to prove it. And the problem is we would have much more risk. I mean, when the rough and the smooth would be difficult.
But Willie, what do you make of this Scottish social attitude survey that says it's the clinching point? It is.
No, absolutely.
It's purely money.
A lot of it is money. There's a lot of people who... There's about 40%...
So we'll hear from our audience whether they think money is at the heart of it or
There's about
something
40% who will stay in the union no matter what, and there's about 25% who will go independent no matter what. But there's a big bulk of people in the middle, and they will be swayed by whether Scotland will be better off or not. It's not just about themselves, it's about the nation as well.
OK. The woman there in red.
If the issue is around money, surely now's not the time to have this debate when we're in a recession.
Well, maybe actually precisely this is the best time to have the debate if actually the economic recession happened to us. Well, we're in the United Kingdom, not as an independent country. If anything, the economic levers would be better to have now, so that regardless of what you wanted to do with them, it would actually be to our advantage to have those levers, so we could take ourselves out of the mess that we're in.
That's at the top there.
With the suggestion that Britain as a whole might lose its AAA credit rating, how exactly would an independent Scotland have a good credit rating if it's with the history of RBS being its biggest bank?
Well, sure, well, you know...
Yeah, briefly, if you would.
I mean, you know, there's two companies that have come out and expressed, as you say, the doubt in the UK's credit rating. But it's worth knowing that 2/3 of the countries that have a AAA credit rating, 2/3 of them have a population of under 10 million. And not only that, with a £1 trillion oil asset base, I think we'd be able to preserve that AAA credit status.
Frank Field, you're rather concerned about the effect on England.
I certainly am, but I'm incredibly depressed by the question and the sort of support that it's actually getting. I thought that this was a debate, a great debate about the nature and destiny of nations and of mankind. The idea that it's all going to be determined on whether you've got a few quid better off in your pocket or not is deeply, deeply depressing. There are clearly lessons that England needs to learn from this whole experiment that you've had and made a success of devolution. But your devolution success has had a consequence on us in England, in that it's affected our bearing and our status and how we think we should actually conduct ourselves in the world. So I was very much hoping that the debate about that you will have at some stage on whether you wish to go independent or not would be a debate which looked at your experiences from devolution, looked at how it had affected who are up to that point and maybe beyond, where you're hopefully friendly neighbours. What were the consequences on them, and whether in fact both countries are going to be stronger by dividing or weaker.
What do you think yourself?
I think we would be weaker. I fear that the debate may go in such a way that the reaction in England is such that we would welcome the measure of devolution which you've had. And certainly I raised this question in the House, in that it's a legitimate issue to raise the Scottish question, but it's not so much yet a legitimate question to raise the English question.
Well, the English question being, if Scotland is self-governing, is England self-governing if Scottish MPs vote in Westminster?
Indeed, that it's naive to think that the first tranche of devolution was the end of the journey, both for you, necessarily, and certainly it was a journey which we couldn't begin in England. And I would welcome to have a debate which was not just about the money, but somehow drew upon our own cultures and our histories and tried to think about our place in the world and made a decision on that.
All right. Now in the front here.
I think the reason why the debate has been shifted onto the economics on whether it would be better if you'd have £500 and you'd be £500 better off or worse off is because the scaremongering unionist parties and media are shifting onto that terrain. Now, the reason why Scotland's young people support independence is because we can be a progressive beacon in Europe and in the world with a fully funded health service, with fully funded education and with a progressive foreign policy which doesn't indulge in imperialist war and illegal wars abroad.
Is there evidence that an overwhelming majority of people under 21 or something in Scotland support
Absolutely.
it?
Young people in Scotland are a lot more prone to support independence.
Which is why you want to give the vote to 16-year-olds?
Absolutely.
Because you think you'll win that way?
I think we'll win. I think young people who are under 18 have the right to vote.
Okay, the woman here in the front here.
Yeah, do you think 16 and 17-year-olds are responsible enough to vote in the referendum?
Well, Ruth Davidson, what do you think?
Well, I think that what's interesting here is actually that what's being proposed is not that all 16 and 17-year-olds should have a vote in the referendum. It's that some 16 3/4-year-olds and some 17-year-olds whose parents have pre-registered on the electoral roll have a vote in this referendum. So it's not about giving all 16 and 17-year-olds a vote. I think there is a debate to be had about where we put the voting age in this country, but you don't shift the goalposts for one referendum. And certainly not if you're saying that the mandate that you have for holding that referendum is from the Scottish parliamentary result in May of last year. Well, I would suggest that your mandate comes from the franchise from that election, which was people who live in Scotland, including EU citizens who are over the age of 18.
But this is surely, Ruth, a great question that's going to affect Scotland, England and Wales. To think that we've jumped from whether people are going to be better or worse off to seeing whether we should fix the voting age to get one result or other. The whole thing is that I'm just shocked by you as an audience, those of you who've been speaking up like this. I thought I was going to come here, be on the defensive as being an English person, and that you would actually try and actually charm me about the values of your independence. And you're just scrabbling around on the floor.
All right. Does anybody want to charm Frank Field with the idea of independence? The man up there in the white shirt, do you want to charm?
He keeps harping on about England, England, England. Surely it's Scotland separating from the United Kingdom, not from England.
OK, and the man behind you in the white shirt there.
Surely if you allow 16 and 17-year-olds to join the armed forces, surely they should have a right to vote for the country they're going to be fighting for.
OK, and you sit down here. Man here in the front, and then I go to you and I'll come to you. Yes.
I'd agree with that point also. If you're old enough to pay tax, you're old enough to be married, then surely you're old enough to have that vote.
What do you say about the point Frank Field's making, that he expected to be charmed by the idea of Scottish independence?
Well, I certainly don't think, for me, it's about £500. I think it's probably about hundreds of years of history, and I think the point was made at the back that it's not about England, Scotland separating from England. It's actually Scotland separating from the United Kingdom.
And the man up there in the red shirt with the white collar.
Yeah, very sorry to disappoint Frank, but while I think a lot of people, some people have got very strong opinions for and against independence, for a lot of people I think are very culturally comfortable in the UK. And I think for them, the main thing is their family, their friends, their career, their lifestyles. And I think that extra £500, it surprises me in no way, shape or form that would be a deciding issue in a poll.
Okay. So I'll come to you, but Ruth, you didn't speak at great length about this. Do you agree with Frank?
But I can.
Well, I'm sure you can speak. I'm sure you can speak for the rest of the programme if you wanted to, but I don't want you to. But on this issue of whether England will need some sort of response, even now ought to have a response to Scottish devolution in terms of its own destiny. What do you say about that? Or do you not care about that because it's an English issue, not a Scottish issue?
Well, I have to say I care far more about the constitutional debate that's happening in Scotland right now, and you know, I think that there's a lot more that we want to talk about in Scotland about the substance of that debate, and at the moment the debate has been restricted to the referendum and the question and the franchise and who should oversee it, and actually we need to talk about the guts of what a separate state would be like versus where we are within a United Kingdom and devolved
settlement. How are you
settlement.
going to do that? Wait for the SNP to put up ideas and knock them down?
Well, hopefully what we can do is the two governments can work together to find a way in which we can have a clear, fair and legal referendum, and then that means that we can move on. Once all of the negotiating around that has been done, we can move on to the substantive issues. But to bring up what Frank has been talking about, there is a rather grandly titled Commission for the Consequences of Devolution, which has been set up by the UK government, which is, I think, more colloquially known as the West Lothian Question Commission, which is to look exactly at that point about where England has English-only legislation because it's legislation that is devolved to Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, but people from Wales and Northern Ireland and Scotland can vote on it in the House of Commons. And, you know, the West Lothian question is not a new anomaly. It has been around for a very long time, as you know, and it's being looked at right now to find out if there is a way to solve that.
Hamza. David, I just wanted to come on a couple of points about the 16, 17-year-old voting age. I agree entirely with the gentleman at the back in the white shirt who said, you know, 16 and 17-year-olds not only join the army cadets, can consent to marriage, consent to having children. And somebody said, well, are they responsible enough to vote? Well, I knock a lot of doors, as do a number of the elected members here. I'll show you some 30 and 40-year-olds who are irresponsible and probably shouldn't be voting as well. But it's not what gets to me the most about the 16 and 17-year-old issue. We've had this principle for 15 years plus. I've not seen any evidence, I'm glad the gentleman at the front has, but I've not seen any evidence to show that 16 and 17-year-olds are more likely to vote for independence. I think they'll ask many questions about it too. But what I don't like...
Sure about that?
Absolutely.
Are you sure?
Oh, I'm positive.
Are you sure you're not going for it because you think it's...
What I don't like to see... What I don't like to see is parties that voted for it in the AV referendum, who now, they wriggle, they dodge and they dive, they duck. And it's this, and now they don't want votes for 16 and 17-year-olds. That is utter hypocrisy. Okay. It's the Groucho Marx school of politics. These are my principles. If you don't like them, I've got others.
Very briefly, Willie Rennie, you're a Liberal Democrat. Presumably you go for votes for 16 on this, do you?
Can I address Frank's point? Because I think it's really important that we try and raise the level of this debate. To me, Britain is one of the most centralised states in the world, and we need to decentralise it, get power much more closer to communities. And that's why we favour home rule. We don't favour independence, but we do favour home rule, where Scotland would be able to raise, through its parliament, the money that it spends. So you can actually make decisions right here in Scotland, but still remaining a partner within the UK. Because Scots, the characteristic of Scots, is really about outward-looking, neighbourliness, community. That's the characteristics of Scots. And I think separation is not that. I think it's not that. We need to have partnership and stay with the UK. England won't suddenly disappear If you go independent, England will still be there. We need to work in partnership with other people.
But
That's
what Frank
important.
has said is that you're going to have a referendum in Scotland, but it will have a profound effect in England. And it's almost as if we need to have a referendum in England about what the English think about this at the same time, because actually it's pretty uncharted territory.
Well, like the English could say, no, we won't let Scotland go.
No, it's not about whether we want it or we don't want it, but Frank's raised a really important point that you can't just separate two countries.
Okay. We go on to another question now from Phil Wishart.